So in the next series of videos, I'm going to be showing you how I made this, and this is a walnut entry table. It's going to have a drawer in the middle and a live edge top. I have it in clamps right now. This is about as far as I am. The top's already done, so all I really have to do is make the drawer. This is going to be a three-part series. The first part I'm going to show you how I made all the mortise and tenons for the piece. And then the second part is mostly going to be how I carved the legs, because there was a lot of planing to do on the legs and maybe the top. And the third part will be finishing and making the drawer. So these are the slabs I'm starting with for this project. They're 2 walnut slabs. I'm also going to be making a cheese board out of this, as well as 4 legs I started out with. The walnut slabs are about 17 inches in the biggest part and about 12 inches in the smallest, which is perfect because they want this to be 12 inches wide, and they're about 1.25 inches thick. Sorry for the camera jumping around in this part. It's hard to try and do stuff like measure and film at the same time. And then you can see they're a little over 1.25 inches thick. The legs I ordered online. I actually got these off of eBay because they were a really good deal and they were already pretty much ready to go, which saves me the time of having to plane them down and joint them. So I started off by cutting them to size. The finished table is going to be about 30 inches tall, so with the thickness of the tabletop I just subtracted that from the legs and then cut them down. These were 30-inch legs, so I only took a little bit off. And then I split part of one of those slabs in half because the rails of the aprons are going to be made out of it. And this one already had a pretty substantial split on one end, so I just utilized that split and split it down the middle, and these 2 pieces are going to be my aprons. So I butted this up against a flat piece of stock, and then I took some measurements, and then I could draw a straight line. This is how I'm going to rip one edge clean. At least this is the easiest way to do it in my shop. So I could reference this off that flat board that I have sitting on my table saw in the track there. Like I said, I think I went about 5 inches. I could do it to both boards. You could see both boards. I get them fairly flat, and then I could use it to make this straight line and put a straight line on both pieces, connecting all those tick marks. So then I had a very straight piece of red oak, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some double-sided tape on the top. This tape works really well. Sometimes it's actually hard to remove the piece when using it. I could go through and take the plastic covering off, and then I transferred the mark on the top to the sides, and you'll see I just lined up that edge with the edge of the red oak. You can see that line lines up on that edge, that line lines up on that edge, so when I rip this it will rip right through that line. You could see there's enough of the red oak sticking past the board, so the red oak is what contacts the fence, and then that is what gets this a clean cut. As you can see, I could rip that clean and ends up pretty perfect. So then it's much easier to work with this material. I can now cross cut it on my radial arm saw, get a nice square edge. This is the second piece, same process. And then, like I said, now I have a flat reference mark, and I could clean these up. So the front 2 aprons, the whole piece is 36 inches long, so the front aprons with the legs are thinner than that. Like I said, 12 inches deep, so the other aprons are pretty thin. So then I'm putting measuring out for my mortises. So the rule of thumb with these tenons is going to be cutting them into thirds, and then I'm also marking on this one. I'm doing haunch tenons. I decided to do that on these because I really should start doing them on all of these mortise and tenon jobs I do. It removes a little less material at the top part of the leg, which I like. It gives you more gluing surface, which I also like, and it also helps prevent the apron from twisting over time because you have that little nub at the top. So after I measured up where I want that mortise on all my pieces, I just used a mortising gauge and transferred it to the lines to the other pieces. I like to mark all of mine before I start so that I could use it as a reference. So the haunch is only going to go down a 1/2 inch. You can see I'm using a little shim stock in the back, and then the regular mortise will go down a full inch. So you can see I have that little 1/2 inch shim stock, which is going to my stop on the mortising jig
will line up with that. So I'm only going a 1/2 inch here. And once I get down to where I want the full inch to go through, I can just remove it, and then you can see that that stop will then go all the way down to the table. So that's how I cut these. You're going in a straight line. So there's that mortise with the accounting for the haunch, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. These are all centered on the piece, so this was pretty easy to do, and that's what both sides looked like. So then, since these are about 5/16 of an inch, I'm going to have to move the fence back and cut them again, because this bit is only 3/8. So you could see I moved it, and then I'm going through and just cleaning those up. When I get to the top, I could put my stop in place, and then this will only go down a 1/2 inch. So I've been using this jig a lot. I absolutely love it. It creates really clean, nice mortises, and the repeatability of it is nice. I know that all of these are in the exact same spot. So when it comes time to put everything together, it makes life just that much easier. So then to cut the tenons, you can see I marked where they should go on the piece, and then I always do a test cut. So this is the test piece to make sure that it will fit in the mortise and make sure it's lined up. On a lot of my past pieces, the mortises and the tenons were cheated to the front so that the front panel was all flush. On this one, because they're in the middle, it's not as important getting that tenon perfectly centered in the piece. If it's a little off, it won't really matter. So once I had that where it fit and I knew my jig was lined up perfectly, I went through and made some marks. I marked out the width of this because it's not cut to width yet, and then I marked this flat edges, so I know how much to cut those aprons, because since this is live edge, you have to account for the undulations in the piece. So all those square marks will help me align where those aprons are going to be cut. So with those 2 legs in the corner, the way I have it, I now know the width of the aprons plus the inch that's going into the mortise. I don't remember the exact number of what these were. I think they were around 28 or something like that. So all for those 2 pieces, I'm cutting 2 28 slabs, and then I could cut the tenons in them. So I just have a simple jig that rides on top of my fence with a vertical straight edge. I keep these clamped into place because they're a little bit bigger. Sometimes you could just free hold them with a hand, and then run these all through. And this is going to cut the basic gist of the tenon. So then usually I will set up a stop on my table saw, but since I'm not cutting all these tenons at the same time, because I'm not cutting all the aprons at the same time, I just raised the blade on my radial arm saw and I could clean up that excess. I have a straight line on top so I could gauge the saw blade off that line. So then since I cut these, since this is live edge, I just kind of cut a generic mortise, which was about 4 inches, and then I could go through and mark where I have to trim off that live edge. Live edge is a little different because the one side's not square, so it was easiest to just make sure I made the mortise as thick as possible, because these 2 pieces are about the same thickness, but then like I said, I have to go through and kind of trim that off, and then I could add the haunch in. So I'm coming down a little bit and in a little bit to create that recess. This will also give me more gluing surface, and I can remove that. This is a little bit of an extra step, but it is a better way to do it versus just straight tenons. If you don't do it this way, because this is, I believe, one of the first times I've done it like this, your furniture is not going to fall apart. It's just a superior method. So I'm just using a handsaw to remove that little extra piece of material, and then it should fit squarely in the piece. Now there's always a little cleanup to do on the tenons, a little cleanup to do on the mortises, but I get it so it fits pretty well, and then I do all the cleanup, usually off camera, because it's just you're removing a little bit of material here or there. It's hard to even tell on camera how much is getting removed. So once I had my 2 long pieces, then I could line those up with my marks and get the width for the side aprons. So like I said, usually I do this all at once, but because it's live edge, it was easiest to build it this way and make sure I get those measurements perfect. These, I believe, were about 8 inches, so I could, like I did before, same process, cut them down on the radial arm saw, then add the tenons on the tenoning jig. This is why I had to use the radial arm saw. I kept this tenoning jig set up so it's still perfectly aligned. And then I can remove the excess on the radial arm saw And then this was a nice clean process. Now I sent progress photos to the customer, and we kind of agreed, because I'm working off of a photo, that these aprons were a little too thick. So I do go back and trim them up a little bit. I'm not going to film doing that because it's the same process as making them. I just went through and trimmed them a little bit. But you probably will notice on camera that later in the views, these aprons are about an inch shorter. So it was a simple process of just trimming down the top and then adjusting the mortises. So like I said, I could gauge off of the side. I could remove the amount of material I need to fit in the mortise. It's a little different on both edges because you could see with this piece especially, the material gets thicker towards the right hand side, so you're removing more off the bottom. Then I can mark for my haunch and then cut that as well. And then this lumber has a little bit of the sapwood on the edge, which is always a nice look because when you finish the piece, that crisp white just looks kind of nice. And then, like I said, same exact process, removing that haunch. Like I said, I do all this by hand and then clean it up afterwards with a sharp chisel. So I ended up having to remove a little bit of my mortise because since these are both an inch thick and they're in the center of the piece, they hit a little bit in the center. So in order for both aprons to be able to slide in, I had to remove about 1/8 of an inch of material off of the one edge. And you can see I have everything marked and measured, so they're all going back in the same spots. Makes life a lot easier. So this is just cleaning up those mortises, cleaning up the tenons so that everything fits nice and flush at this point. Now the legs came a little rough sawn, but I'm not doing much cleanup on that because you'll see I end up removing a ton of the material on there, so planing it would have been almost pointless. They were definitely square enough to work with for this process. If they weren't square, I would have had to treat them beforehand. That's how that all fits together. So you can see the legs are square. And this is the beginning of the next video, but I put it in here so that you could see everything put together.